The Brownsville Elementary School was built in 1938 and was located at 1005 North Y at the intersection of West Strong Street. The structure was designed by architect Solomon Joseph Welch Sr. and constructed by Dyson and Company out of Fairhope, Alabama, for the costs of $138,380. The bid for the construction was due on January 4, 1938 by 10 a.m. and was known as the PWA Project FLA 1235DS. The school was completed that same year with 180 students, 6 classrooms and a library and kitchen. 4 teachers were hired as their full-time staff along with their principal, Mrs. Eunice Hall, to lead them. Mrs. Hall was well experienced, having been the principal of Ali Iniestra from 1918 to 1926. Clopton was born on September 26, 1895, the daughter of Nathaniel Nat Vanderwall Clopton and Shada and Jones. She would graduate from Pensacola High School in 1914 before marrying Frank Dewberry Hall Sr. in 1922 in Pensacola. Her husband began his service as a fireman prior to 1917 before transferring to the Pensacola Police Department. He would pass away in 1944 after 32 years with the force and was buried in Clopton Cemetery. Eunice, on the other hand, spent her life as a teacher and was a principal until after 1950. She would follow Frank to Clopton Cemetery on October 30, 1986. Their son, Frank Jr., would also graduate from Pensacola High School and serve with the U.S. Navy and retire in 1991 after 44 years in the paper manufacturing industry. Next in line of authority at Brownsville was the school matron, Mrs. Lavanda E. Pitts Henderson from the farming community of Molino. This position was responsible for the health and well-being of the school's pupils by handling the day-to-day activities and paperwork. She would marry James Robert Henderson in 1894 in Baldwin County, Alabama. Following his death, she went to work for the school until sometime before 1940. She would pass away in 1962 and join James in the Union Hill Cemetery. Next in line was the important job of lunchroom supervisor, Mrs. Mattie Elizabeth Bracken McQuaig, the daughter of Charles B. Braskin and Armentha Cobb. She was a native of Munson, Florida, in Santa Rosa County, and would marry Francis Farlie McQuaig in 1922. After his death, she would remarry Hiram Edward O'Neill in 1963. She would remain a supervisor with the school board until sometime before 1950. In 1947, she was listed as the deputy of voting precinct 57 at 3015 West Branard Street. She would join Francis in Bayview Cemetery in 1983. Attached to the original photo above are the lunchroom helpers of Mrs. Bessie Hardy and Miss C. Harper, with the janitress Miss Grace Price, none of which could be located. Outside the employment of the school was the indomitable force of the PTA. The school's first PTA president was Mrs. Lyda Evelyn Irwin Laritz, the daughter of John Franklin Irwin, a farmer at Riley's Field in Davisville, Florida, and Annie Sue Irwin. She would marry John Joseph Laritz from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1931. In 1940, the young couple were living at 2916 West DeSoto Street in Brownsville while John was a warden at the convict camp on Davis Highway just north of today's Airport Boulevard. He would pass away in 2002 and was buried in the Holy Cross Catholic Cemetery. The first mention of the Brownsville Schools Group was on November 13, 1938, when the News Journal highlighted Mrs. Mae Eddins Mimms, who had been selected as the PTA program chairman. She immediately set her group to work obtaining a piano and any other additional lunchroom equipment for the new school. Finally, the passage of time wore the old school down, as she lay shrouded in the memories of so many Pensacolians from that era. Those that didn't attend the school still lived within the confines of Brownsville with memories of happier times. What would become Brownsville was born around 1908 and was specifically created as a working-class community. As the economy improved, it became possible for families to buy or build their own homes instead of the boarding houses packed into the downtown area. The areas like North and East Hill were outside the budgets of your average working man in 1908. Brownsville gave them an escape from all of that. These new home sites were west of the downtown area, but still on the streetcar lines to Cupfrians Park, where Old Baptist Hospital is located today. The park provided entertainment such as horse and car racing, picnic areas, baseball games, horseback and carriage riding, and every other recreational event you could think of. The name of the new community was to honor Lucius Screven Brown, a prominent businessman in real estate, banking, and insurance. In 1912, he was responsible for the paving of Cervantes Street and bringing in water lines to modernize the new community, thus increasing the new home buyers. He would pass away in Pensacola in 1963 and buried in Rennes, Georgia. Brownsville holds the distinction of being one of the first in Pensacola whereby the home buyer could have an actual yard of any size. Many of the homes were wooden shotgun-style homes so common in its day. By the 1950s, family businesses became dominant to the area. This was part because the only route from Mobile, Alabama, to Tallahassee was down Mobile Highway and through Brownsville. One of the last known Brownsville Elementary cafeteria workers was Addie Foy Roberson Gibson. Upon the death of her husband, William Bird Gibson in 1959, she was forced to go to work doing the one thing she knew best, cooking. She would retire in 1972, prior to her death and burial in St. John's Cemetery. Below is the other workers who worked with Addie. She is the worker the second from right.